Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Breaking Bad News, a thinking council to listen, learn, and speak about loss and grief and death. Thank you for joining us. I'm very honored to have some people with me who have agreed to talk about this topic from a personal and professional perspective. And I'd like to begin by introducing you to them briefly. Anne Wadey, I have known for more than 20 years and in a personal capacity, but I know from listening to her that she's an expert in the space of bereavement. She's a bereavement counselor and she works as a consultant with organizations, and she can expand further on that herself if she needs to. Anne will speak after Fiona. Fiona Spargo-Mabbs is somebody I met through my work with Bespoken, and Fiona has suffered a very deep and personal loss that which we would never wish on anyone. I think most people agree it is one of the most difficult losses to deal with, and that is the death of a child. And she's going to share some of her story and some thoughts. And then finally, after Anne, we're going to have Ceri, who's going to talk about, he shared with me that he started at 16 cutting grass in a cemetery and his career built from there. So we look forward to what he has to say. Sunita is also joining the call, and we hope to have Lisa join us too, to listen, to engage, and to learn. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit. Before that, I'm going to have a thinking round where we're just going to appreciate something as we arrive, perhaps about this meeting, perhaps something in our day, because Christopher Klein says we are not present until we have spoken. And so, Fiona, what are you appreciating as you arrive today?
I'm very appreciative of this space. I think we definitely don't talk about death and loss enough, and yet it's part of you. It's an inevitability, and it means that many of us come at it unprepared, and then come out the other side without having spaces and people that we can talk to comfortably and honestly. So I'm very grateful to you, Fiona, for creating this.
Thank you. Anne, what are you appreciating as you arrive?
Well, thank you for promoting me to being a counsellor, which actually I'm not, although I do counselling type conversations with a number of people. I always appreciate meeting new people in this space, whether it's through their personal experience, their professional experience. Having been working, well, having trained as a nurse at 18, I've encountered death in many circumstances since, well, let's say I'm getting towards 70. And I never stop learning from people. So everything that I know has come as a consequence of people giving me the privilege of listening to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Ceri, what are you appreciating as you arrive?
Fiona, most importantly, I appreciate the opportunity to listen to like-minded people about a subject that touches us all and to learn from them. And I'm very grateful to come here and offer some of my thoughts as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Sunita, what are you appreciating as you arrive?
Hello, everyone. I would like to appreciate you, Fiona Brennan-Scott, that I know you, as knowing you, I'm able to be here. And that is something that in my country where I come from and people around never talk about. And I think that is very big privilege to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to just close the chat and I'm going to set a timer so that I can contain myself about the reason why I decided to do this today. And I'm going to also put my phone on silent. So it's a reminder for everyone in the room to put their phones on silent if they're not already on silent. It was the beginning of November when a friend wrote a message on Facebook to say that his daughter and his mother were ill. Because they were family friends, I reached out to his wife, a closer friend, and asked what I could pray for. Because of my faith, that's what I do. And because they're in a different country, I couldn't drop off a meal or offer to do more. And I discovered that their daughter was in hospital, had had seizures, had lupus, and had been put in an induced coma to stabilize her. As the week progressed, I received updates, and by the Thursday, things were pretty critical. And as they brought her out of the coma, she had more seizures, and they'd made the decision, having found out that she had no brain function, that they would let her pass away naturally. It was then my job to pass this news on to my family. Telling my husband wasn't a problem. Telling two of my children also quite easy, but one of them, who'd been to South Africa quite recently and had grown close to this family, closer, I knew it would be difficult. Now, to use the STAR system, if you've ever come across it for interviews: situation, task, action, result. You now know the situation. Another insight: I was at the airport by the time I was delivering the news, and the phone call came through from a family member. My task, was to share that news. My action was the child I was traveling to Rome with had just arrived. There was very little time. I knew that the person in question would want to know everything. Instead of allowing them to eke that information out of me bit by bit, I established that they weren't going to be interrupted. By the way, my main motive was the fact I didn't want them to hear from anyone else, from social media, or a text message from someone. So I shared the news. Result: fail. I wasn't interviewing for a job, but I failed dismally, according to the person in question. And on reflection, who knows if it was because the news would have been received badly anyway, but I know that there were things I did that didn't make it better, and that in fact potentially made it worse. So I thought, it's been a long time. I've been in this situation for years. I never feel like I'm competent. I'm supposed to be an expert on effective communications. How can I learn to do this better? A week later, I used my time to think, to reflect on the situation. And as is typical, towards the end of my TARDIS 10 minutes, as I call it, I had an epiphany. I was taken back to when I was 14, and I made a decision to travel to my sister's boarding school and break the news to her that our father had died suddenly that morning, and spent the journey on the way back, the 10 miles, breaking to her slowly and gently. I checked 2 weeks ago. Apparently I did it quite well. So the other thing that happened was, within a day, I was retelling this story to my husband and realized it didn't start by me deciding to tell my sister this story. It started an hour earlier, when I'd arrived home at lunchtime from school. My mother climbed out of the car, distressed, crying, and called out to me, "He's dead, Fiona. Your father is dead." And so I believe at that point, When I decided to travel through and see my sister, I made the decision that nobody was going to hear bad news in such an awful way again. But 40-something years later, I messed up. So I think if we can save people from the stressful situation where we don't act at our best under stress, that they will do better and the people they're telling the news to will do better. And so that's my hope as we meet today. And on that note, I would love to hand over to another Fiona Spargo-Mabbs. She is the founder of the Daniel Spargo-Mabbs Foundation, and she founded this charity motivated by the loss of her son. So something incredible came out of something incredibly awful, I would think. But I will hand over to Fiona and let her share her thoughts today. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Fiona. And thank you for the introduction as well, and for the opportunity to be part of this space. So as you've explained, as you've heard from Fiona, my son Dan died when he was 16. It was completely, absolutely, totally unexpected. I thought he'd gone to a party with some friends not far from home. He didn't come home. And I went through the whole, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm not going to go into the whole detail of that kind of those next few hours of just not being able to get through on his phone, not having his friends' numbers. And then the door went and it was the police and, are you the parents of Daniel Spargo-Mabbs? And I don't know about any other parents in this place, but it's one of those things you kind of imagine, but you just never ever really think that's going to happen. And saying a whole load of stuff that made no sense at all. And anyway, we spent the next 2 and a bit days in intensive care with Dan on life support. He was moved from a general intensive care in northwest London to King's in South London, where they've got a specialist unit, but he was incredibly poorly. The little bag of MDMA, which is the same as ecstasy, but that looks identical to the other 4 boys that were doing exactly the same thing that night, turned out to have just been incredibly strong, and he had massively overheated, and his body just shut down, and he eventually died from multiple organ failure. So we had the shock, we had the trauma of watching this beautiful boy that's just the last person on anyone's radar to be in that sort of situation. My bright, beautiful, chatty boy that everybody loved, the prom king of his year, there he was, dying, and we were praying and hoping, and just, and then someone would say something, and you'd be down in the depths of despair again, and that spiral around and around. So, and it's not a nice, I guess there are nice ways to die. There are many not nice ways to die, but dying from multiple organ failure at the age of 16 is, there are lots of things that are very difficult for a parent to know are going on. So we lost Dan, but we're then launched into a whole world of police. We were given a family liaison officer while we were in the hospital. Literally at the moment, Dan was being wheeled out of one intensive care, not knowing if he was going to make the journey across London to another. There were a couple of arrests. There was a criminal justice process. There was a trial. There was a sentencing kind of 6 months later. We got Dan's phone back from the police at that point, found out a whole load more information. One of the things that was difficult was all the stuff that we didn't know about the narrative that led to the death of our son. There was so much we didn't know. So much that we still don't know, things I've just had to let go of, things we learnt in the court as a victim of crime. Another whole story. I'm watching my timer and time running out. The other thing that was very difficult that I do want to just say, but also a blessing in a weird kind of way, was just the incredible and very unexpected media interest in Dan's death. So we had the first reporter knocking the first thing the next day. and they just didn't stop knocking. And we decided to talk that day, and it turned out that it was already in the papers. Ecstasy teen, illegal rape, you know, all sorts of headlines. They've got pictures of Dan off Facebook. But we talked, and Dan's death was in every national paper the following day, so 2 days after he died. So actually, in terms of breaking bad news, I didn't have to tell anyone. I didn't have to tell a single person, and our house was full of everybody that I think I had ever known over those next few weeks. But so many big-hearted, kind-hearted people who had heard on the radio, they'd seen on the television, they'd read in the paper, they'd heard from someone else. I mean, of course, there's a whole teenagers grapevine that spread the news really rapidly as well. We're part of a really vibrant church community. Of course, they were praying, so everybody knew them. My work knew, our neighbours knew. So the news got round without the only one friend who didn't pick it up anywhere. And when she messaged and clearly didn't know, I just said, look, just Google Daniel Spargo-Mabbs, and then, you know, so that was kind of helpful. But I have run out of my 5 minutes. There are many more things I would say, and if I get another chance later on, I'd love to say the things that were helpful, because there were so many things that were.
Thank you so much. And Fiona, you absolutely will, but thank you for what you've shared so far. I'm now going to pass over to Anne Wadey, who I've known for over 20 years and is a bereavement consultant now. But I think if I were to have bad news broken to me, I would choose Anne to be that person because of her kindness and compassion. So, Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. I think the first one I would want to say is nobody should ever beat themselves up around this breaking bad news thing, because the news is always bad. You can't make it into good news. And one of the first things I do when talking about bereavement in any sector, but particularly in the health service, where people are often motivated to make people better, is say, you cannot make this better. None of us have a magic wand to bring the person who has died back to life. So don't try and make it better. So you might not make the best job of it, but actually you will have cared enough to share with that person and try and do it with humanity and with compassion. So I don't think there is an ideal way to do it. I do think, Fiona, what you said about if you're in a position to do it over a period of time where people can ask for the news at the pace that they want it, that is ideal. Certainly that's something that we would talk about, breaking bad news of a life-limiting illness, for example, so that you initially would give a diagnosis, and then people can ask about the prognosis and possible treatment or not at the time they're ready to hear it. I have to say, if you're ringing from a health facility and it's an unexpected call, people are not expecting good news. So, and the most important thing, I think, is not to prevaricate about the language, because there are so many euphemisms for somebody having died. But what has happened is that they have died. And I think it is incredibly important that we use those words. When I used to train A&E nurses, I would do a fun sketch where I'd say, I'd play the distressed relative, and I said, what do you mean you've lost them? How can you lose them? You're a hospital. You're meant to look after people. Have you got search parties out? And actually, patients do go missing, sadly, in various circumstances. So there is room for ambiguity. Most families have code for when they share the news. My mother's was so-and-so's gone. I think that's what she told me when my grandmother had died. Grandma's gone. And I immediately knew, because that was the family code, that grandma had died. Nobody else would have understood it as that. So I think precision about language And that is irrespective of what the age of the person who's receiving the news is. If one's breaking bad news to children, using words like gone to sleep can instantly bring in, well, I don't want to go to sleep because I might die. So, and children who think very literally, one has to avoid that. I had a chat to Fiona Spargo-Mabbs just before we came on the call to check with her about explaining this. I won't use the word lost. I hardly ever use it. If a bereaved person uses the word lost, that's their choice. People can exercise agency over the language they use themselves to describe what has happened to them. But I won't use the word lost, particularly if it is a child that's died. Parents whose children die feel immense guilt. In fact, most bereaved people feel guilt, even if there's no rational grounds for it. We feel guilty. We didn't say something. We did say something. Such and such wasn't right. Sometimes, tragically, particularly with young children, a moment's inattention has contributed to the death of the child. So perhaps there is some reason for guilt. But lost, we lose things. We lose a child on the beach or in the supermarket. It's carelessness. And when somebody dies, it's not through carelessness. So I think that's terribly important. We have to be prepared to repeat the news, say it more than once. We have to be prepared that people might just seemingly go completely unresponsive for a little while because the news is just so overwhelming, they lack any ability to respond. And then we just have to stay with them in that space until they're able and arrange a follow-up contact with them if necessary. But it is incredibly hard because it is often something that distresses us. Because of my long experience of working in the health service and then in other sectors with bereaved people up to 50 years after the death, I'm never shocked. Well, I'm rarely shocked. I'm never surprised that people die because I know it can happen at any time, at any age. I am often sad, and I will usually be sad for the person I'm breaking the news to, even if it's not a death that has personally impacted me. So I hope that's helpful, but never beat oneself up over it. It's more important that you stay in the space for the person you care for.
That is a lovely place to land before we hand over to Ceri. Ceri is the person I know least on this call. He was introduced to me by the lovely John Cross, a mutual acquaintance, well, an acquaintance of mine, actually. I don't know him very well. But Ceri, as I may have mentioned, started his career cutting grass at a cemetery and rose from there without intending any pun, and is now team bereavement leader at Newport City Council. Over to you, Ceri. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. So quickly, I would like to talk today about the assumptions we have regarding personal loss and the observations and choices we make from a personal point of view, really, rather than a professional point of view. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today. I want to start with a personal story, really. So my own experience of loss and some of the hardest things I've had to deal with, surprisingly. 20 years ago, my mother passed away, or died, as we should say. Thank you, Anne, for that. And I totally agree with the sentiments that Anne put across there. And I'm glad to hear what you've said, as I was concerned about how I broke the news of that. My mother was 55. She was strong, independent, intelligent woman, the leader of the family, an absolutely wonderful grandmother. She hadn't been ill too long, but I had a feeling because she was a nurse, she'd knew exactly what was wrong. She was diagnosed with lung cancer during the week, and on the weekend she passed away. So given the fact that I'd worked within bereavement services for 10 years. I'm the man of the family. I have to deal with organising the funeral, organising the paperwork, making sure everyone's informed, making sure everybody's aware of when the funeral takes place. And of course, you do that diligently. You work in bereavement services, so you must be able to deal with loss in order to do that. And of course, all of these things pass by and you're going through it because you're still in a little bit of shock. But the hardest moment of all is breaking that news to the children. I'm quite pragmatic. So I'm glad, based on what Anna said, at least, that I made a good fist of doing it. And the language I used was all appropriate. But of course, having done that, I'd put myself into a position where I wasn't really being myself. I was protecting everybody else. So I had no time to be myself. Quite a strange predicament. So I got myself into a situation that, fortunately, I have a wonderfully loving wife and a great relationship. And she pointed out the fact that I needed to speak to somebody. And I needed to speak to somebody very quickly after the funeral. Because unbeknownst to me, I wasn't making any sense any longer. Not that I ever do, by the way, especially in my wife's eyes. But she was quite right. And she hit the nail on the head. And through work, I was able to speak to somebody. And I was able to get the help that I needed. I was able to get the time that I needed to reflect. And I was able to be me, really, rather than the bereavement professional in the family that was looking after everybody else. So I mean, throughout that, and having somebody to look out for you is an incredibly important thing. In terms of breaking the bad news, I'm pleased to hear from what Anna said that I did make a pretty good fist of it, really, even though it was incredibly upsetting, because of course it is incredibly upsetting. I mean, in terms of what helped, it was being able to have somebody to tell you that you're not being yourself, to be able to point that out, to be honest. And it was wonderful to be able to speak to somebody who could help and could help quickly. And then, of course, you learn lessons from that, and you learn to take time. You learn that silence and also conversation about difficult topics before they arise are incredibly important. And I think that leads me on quite nicely to observations I make now in a professional capacity, with the advent of direct cremations, where services don't really take place. And people of certain generations always not wanting to be a burden on their families. What burden will that provide to their families when their families don't have closure? It's quite an interesting thing for us to possibly think about and discuss. And I guess as a closing thought, I thought, what have I learned throughout this? I said, by putting this brief piece together, what has loss taught me? And mostly it's assumptions about how we cope, about what others want from us. And these things often lead to isolation. I think honest, compassionate communication is probably the path that'll help us navigate grief together and in a much better way. So I guess if we were to leave with a thought, it would be, if we were to start one conversation today about our own wishes or feelings around loss, who would it be with and what would we say? Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, all of you. We're going to have a round in a moment with our freshest thinking. Sunita, you're more than welcome to start as somebody who's listened to all of us. I just want to recap on what stood out for me. Fiona, I really heard you highlight something that was very unexpected, and that was the blessing that media was in that situation. I'd never thought of that before, or that it could be possible. And so that's interesting, because I think I was coming into this session today thinking of how media can be really unhelpful, and especially text messages, and how cruel and crude they can be. And you really focused on language around grief and the language we use and the language we should use. That is so helpful. I'm so glad we have a recording to listen back to, because I really want to take that on board and process it. And Ceri, thank you for helping me think about how important it is to have someone to observe us and someone we trust nearby to say things aren't right and talk to somebody. I think that's really helpful. I'm also, for myself, celebrating something I did write a few years ago when we knew our mum might not survive. And my husband and I were traveling to New Zealand and Australia. And I reached out to, we had one sister living in the town. And I asked her husband to phone me when Mum passed, so that she would not have to do that while she was dealing with grief herself. And I didn't realize how clever that was, because I did the thing of saving my big sister from being the bearer, breaking bad news. But the real blessing was my brother-in-law never phoned me usually. So the moment I received that phone call and his name came up on my phone, I was already processing the bad news I was about to receive. And so with absolutely zero pressure, Sunita, would you like to share your freshest thinking? And we have, give or take, we've got 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes each, so that we're sharing the space and the time. But yeah, what are your thoughts? What is your freshest thinking as you listened?
So I would like to appreciate all of you because that made me thinking and made so much sense. With Fiona Spargo-Mabbs, I would like to say that social media, it's everywhere now, and I think that you don't need to break that bad news. It's in that hard time, it's easier in kind of way. From Anne saying a loss, that is, I always thought it's that you lost the person, that it's not going to be with you anymore. But then you're thinking, if you said the person died, it's that closure. So that made me thinking that it's not lost. It's lost the time that we had together. It's not there, but the person actually died. And the Ceri, is that correct? That you want to be with the people who you want to be around, that it's very, very important. And then usually you think you don't want to be with people you want to process on your own, but someone that is just there for you, even just sitting quietly, it's very, very important as well in the end, and just being there. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Sunita. Anne, what is your freshest thinking?
I'm reflecting on how to phrase this, and this is a completely new thought in my head, because 2 people have used the word closure. And it used to be thought in bereavement theories that we basically had to put the person that had died sort of away, sort of like on a bookshelf or in a cupboard, and they disappeared out of our lives. And we now know that that isn't really quite how it works. So I'm thinking about it right now. It's more the ending of a chapter in a book. And so we move into a new chapter. And what happens is we put that person in a new space. And so for somebody, perhaps one of a couple, they just look to the chair that they always sat in and sort of say, now, Jack, what would you think about this? And because they were married for so long, they know exactly what Jack would have said. So they become an internal reference point. Fiona has created this amazing memorial to Daniel. And I do have a recollection of the media when Daniel died. Just faintly, it rings bells with me. there's this wonderful memorial that is such a tribute that he had, and he has made a difference through her and her family and their friends. Or some people go to visit a grave. Ceri will know that. I know of a situation where it was the cemetery attendants who first knew that an elderly gentleman was unwell because he didn't turn up at his wife's grave that day, as he always did. And of course, because he was the owner of the grave, they had his contact details, they were able to follow up. And that man was in need of assistance. So we don't have to get rid of the person out of our lives. They don't disappear. They don't stop having been who they were. They remain an incredibly precious part of who we are because of the impact they've had in our own lives, as well as those of other people. So we can still treasure them and not think of being without them. But the nature of the relationship has changed in a way that, yes, is irrevocable, because it is through death, not divorce or them having moved away or whatever. But it's not goodbye in a sense of a permanent way, particularly perhaps also for people of faith.
Thank you, Anne. That's very valuable. Fiona, what is your freshest thinking now?
I don't know if it's, I would call it freshest, but I'm keen. I was pleased that Ceri raised the direct cremation, because this is new to me. My brother died in June after a very short, very aggressive brain cancer. And he had a direct cremation, and I didn't even know this was a thing. And I and our parents are both still alive, and we found it just so hard. And I was with them when on the day, and at the time we knew when Alex was going to be cremated, and we decided, we between us came up with this idea that they live in Swanage and Dorset, so we needed to do something to mark it. It's such an important, we knew that Alex had died. There was going to be a service and the service was a celebration of his life, but there needed to be something about, this was the end of the Alex that the physicality, it's a really important rite of passage. It was for us anyway. And so we went onto the pier in Swanage and we threw sunflowers into the sea. I pushed my dad in his wheelchair, and actually, it was for us, that was a really beautiful and the right thing to do at an awful time, because just a tip, if anyone wants to do something similar, sunflowers, I hadn't thought, they create like this little boat. And it was quite a still day, and you could see this bright yellow just drifting out to sea. We just tracked it for, I don't know, we could track it for about half an hour, 40 minutes, these sunflowers. It was for us that there needed to be something. And I know that's not, and he would only have done it to try and, for exactly the reasons you're saying, Ceri, he's in Newcastle, my parents are in Dorset, they're both very frail. It would have been complicated to get there. It made it simpler for everybody. Let's just do one trip up and not, that it would only have been to help people, and it's cheaper, I didn't realize this was a thing. And after Alex had this, I've been saying to everybody, don't do it. It's really bad. And I didn't realize how many other people actually of our generation and older had planned it. And one or two have said, well, actually, my dad, all his friends had died, and there's only me and the family, so I can see there could be circumstances in which maybe it's an appropriate thing to do. But I would just say, think very hard about the people that are going to be left behind when you die, and ask them what they might find helpful. And I guess you don't know until you're there how difficult it might be, but I would just throw it out there. My mum and my dad and I found it very, very difficult, and we needed to do something to mark that. I hate the word passing, but is a passing, the physical passing of Alex's physical body into dust, the end of Alex, as it were, even though he, sorry, all the even those that you all know, but
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Ceri, what is your freshest thinking, or what are your thoughts?
Essentially, at the height of loss, that you can demonstrate bravery, determination to ensure that others don't go through what you do, and that you can do so much good in the name of the one you loved. I thought that was inspiring from Fiona, and really emotional as well. But yeah, an incredible story. Also, from Anne, and the use of language, I mean, is quite refreshing that by total accident I was able to use the correct approach, and it sort of backs you up when you hear that. So that was good. Yeah, just a lovely to hear people's stories as well.
Thank you, Ceri. So I'm happy for us to have another round of anything that we would like to share, and I think this can quite easily be as people are ready, and we can have silence, but as people are ready to speak, to go ahead. One thought I had as I was listening was remembering a almost hour YouTube video I watched last week, because I checked in with a friend who lost her husband in Ireland a year ago at the end of November. And I just said, how are you? And it would be good to have a catch up. I haven't been to Ireland since he passed away. And she sent me this grief counseling expert on YouTube. And she said she found this very helpful. And it's called Brave Widows is her handle. And what she said, that you may have heard the expression, grief is love that has no place to go. And I heard that a couple of years ago, and I thought it was beautiful, because we don't grieve if we haven't loved. Death is generally because we cared for and loved someone. And she said she didn't find that particularly helpful, but what she did find helpful was the idea that it's a bank account that needs to be spent. And you don't know how much is in that bank account. I'm just extrapolating now. You don't know how much is in the bank account, but you keep having to spend this grief. And at some time, it may dwindle. At some time, it may be leaned on a bit, and sometimes a lot, but she found that really useful. So I'm going to share that for what it is worth. And just opening the room to anyone else who would like to speak. Go ahead, Anne.
Thank you. I sometimes say that there's no bottom to the well of tears. You never run out. I think from my nodding of my head, you will have gathered that I feel very strongly about direct cremation, although it is something we used for my mother, and I'll explain. I've also worked as a funeral celebrant, and I know from conducting the ceremonies that last moment when people are perhaps able to touch the coffin as they leave the chapel before cremation or at the graveside is immensely powerful and precious to many people. We did it for my mother because she had dementia, and we'd moved her to the town where we live once she no longer had any idea where she was. We had to move her because her previous home closed. And she knew nobody in the town where we live other than my sister and I, except her carers, but she died during lockdown. She didn't have COVID, the home kept it out. And so we thought, what is the point? There is nobody in this town other than the two of us who know that she's died. And we did love her, but, and this is important, the relationship was quite ambivalent at times, and that often makes for more difficult grief than when it's been all hunky-dory, perhaps, during the relationship. We did then take her ashes, so there were still physical remains, to a ceremony in what had been her hometown, when we were able to assemble with a small number of people who were all her friends. So, and I did almost stop the minister who we got to take the service. I wrote the eulogy, although got him to deliver it. And he stood there and he said, well, of course, this isn't a funeral. And I very nearly said, well, it's the only one she's getting. And she's up there, just not in a coffin. She's in an urn. So there was still that moment of a physical ending. She was going to be scattered in the same place as our father had been scattered many years before. So I completely endorse what Ceri and Fiona are saying. There will be occasional times when it's right, but I think it's something to consider very, very carefully. But I am very aware that in these current times, there are very strong financial reasons why people are sometimes almost forced into it when it's not the right thing. And that makes me very angry as well as very sad. But that's a huge topic and political and probably not for us today.
Yeah, thank you.
If I said, oh, sorry.
Please, go on.
You very politely put your hand up and I didn't.
Sorry.
Okay. I wanted to say a little bit about what helped me, because I didn't know if that was useful, but there were so many things that were incredibly helpful to me. I mean, big thing was starting a charity, because I think especially with a kind of a shock and a traumatic loss, there is so much adrenaline flying around, and also a community, I mean, especially with a teenager, a community of people who are just bewildered and needing something. That positive focus did such a lot of good. Even if we hadn't, I mean, the charity is amazing. We're working with more than 800 schools. We've got a play that's on the GCSE drama set. That I could talk about the charity. The charity's grown and grown and grown, and has hopefully spared some parents from going through similar things, and hopefully spared a lot of young people from all the challenges and stuff that drugs and alcohol can cause. So the charity does good work. Having a charity helped a lot of people as a positive focus when none of us could do the thing we really wanted to do, which was to save Dan. That moment had passed, but we could put that energy into fundraising and into making connections and into doing something positive, making this bad thing do good work. And that has been really helpful, incredibly helpful for me. It also complicates things. And actually, I'm going away in a couple of weeks, and one of the things I'm going to do while we're away, we're having a sort of little self-imposed retreat after a very, very difficult year, just to do some reflecting on that. Starting a charity after a child dies, what's helpful, what is actually, how much does that prolong that grief? And Dan's story is at the heart of everything. The play tells his story. His face is on our logo, but the fact that it still matters to people that Dan died. Anyway, that's one thing. It's kind of an unusual thing. Most people don't do that. Many people do. Many charities are started from a place of pain, but anyway, it's not a normal response to grief, but it was very helpful to me. But one of the things that was so very helpful was just people just being there and doing lots of really, really practical things. I was just absolutely totally useless. I could do nothing other than just stand there going, I don't understand. He was here and now he's not here. I don't understand. And I couldn't fix my mind on anything. Definitely couldn't even, and I felt sick for 2 or 3 years, actually. Mostly I don't know anymore, but so eating wasn't particularly a priority anyway. But our church cooked for us for 6 weeks. I couldn't even work out what plate to get out of the cupboard, let alone think about things that very practical things, like even working out a shopping list. There's a lot of mental processing you've got to do to work out how many carrots you might need to buy, but also things like taking the cat to the vet and doing the laundry. People would say, what can I do, and really just wanted to do something. People were just so kind and so big-hearted, and I have to say, I had no idea how much gold there was in our friends, in our community, in our family, in our colleagues. It's just, and people sometimes said things that were insensitive, but it wasn't, because they were just, it's so, we knew that they were always meant from a place of care and love. There were very few times that we thought, God, that really was actually like, well, I won't even give examples, but mostly you knew that it was so well intended, and I was just so grateful for the bravery of people facing these two people in a complete mess and muddle, and saying anything at all, and not avoiding us and not crossing the street, just being there was amazing. And we literally, there were days when there was standing room only in our house, because it was just so full of people. And that, in that time of chaos after Dan died, just people being there was so incredibly helpful. But as I say, the practical stuff as well just made a world of difference. But I also recognised there were times when I needed no people. You know, it got to the point where Tim had gone back to work, my parents had gone back home, they just moved in with us for 6 weeks, and lovely people kept coming round. And actually, do you know, I just wanted to be able to do weird things like hold Dan's dressing gown, or, do you know, just do, without knowing that someone might just knock on the door at any moment. I needed to have sort of protected spaces. We had an amazing bereavement nurse from King's, a paediatric bereavement nurse, who was just incredible and understood things. Journaling, I found, helped me trying to articulate. I'm an English teacher, so maybe that's a me thing, but trying to make sense of something which actually, to be honest, still doesn't really make sense, but trying to put into words something kind of, it helped me, the attempt helped me. And reading, I could only read anything that had also been written by another bereaved parent, and I couldn't read anything actually for 3, 4, 5 years. And as an English teacher, that was hard, but I just couldn't process anything other than this. And therapy, I saw someone, the person I'm seeing at the moment, I saw yesterday, and I actually just cried the whole time. I heard that a good friend of ours died yesterday, and it wasn't expected quite so soon. It wasn't unexpected, and everything. He'd been there in the hospital with us when Dan died, so I was straight back into that room, watching Dan with Al there, praying. You know, just it doesn't take much to, and I've down that rabbit hole and right back in that intensive care room at King's again, and everything gets muddled up for me, with Dan, and so get the help you need, I would say, and be that for other people. Just, I would say, be brave when people have lost someone. It's very easy to worry about saying the wrong thing, but I think most people know if it's meant from a place of love, and if you can frame it in, I'm really sorry, I don't know what to say. I just want you to know that I'm so sorry, and I'm here in whatever way that would be useful. Anyway, sorry, that was very long.
Thank you, Fiona. Ceri.
I think I just wanted to touch on what Fiona and Anne had said about the direct cremation, and the fact that 15% of all funerals nationally in Britain now are direct cremations. 70% of all funeral plans that are sold, which usually have a lifetime span of 10 years, are direct cremations. This is you. If we speak about what we want, what our wishes are, with our families, with our loved ones, with the ones that will be left behind, then I guess closure that Fiona had with her parents can be pre-planned, so that a direct cremation could be something that could be beneficial as long as it was discussed beforehand, and that people felt that they were coming to terms with that physical loss. It could be a favorite restaurant of somebody, it could be a favorite spot, it could be a celebration of life, a traditional funeral isn't always the way things should be, perhaps because it's been this way for so long. I guess what I wanted to say really is that people can look into these things. We need to speak about it more openly before it happens, and then it becomes so much easier to deal with. It becomes so much easier to ask relevant questions of suppliers in the marketplace so that we know exactly what happens to our loved one through the process. That's incredibly important and something that probably doesn't get discussed enough. Potentially will be in about 6 or 7 years for different reasons. But I think these things have a place. We probably all have a duty to each other to discuss these things more often so that it doesn't become a problem where people can't get the closure. And I liked what Anne said about closure. And I also liked what Fiona said about it, because for me, the closure is saying goodbye to the physical and allowing yourself to grieve. That's what closure means to me. It's not closure and forgetting about it or it going away. It just allows you to grieve and to remember the good times and the love that you shared with the person who's physically isn't you anymore, but in our memories, of course, will always be you. So that's just all I wanted to add, really.
Thank you. Anita, as the person who hasn't volunteered or put your hand up, I just want to check in with you and see if there's something you would like to say now.
So it's a little bit in my mind now about the cremation and being buried as a body in the ground. So I always thought I'm going to be buried in the ground, but my husband said, as we bought the house, we needed to write the will, and they ask you, what do you want to do? So I wasn't expecting that, but he said straight away, I want to be cremated because I don't want that worms eat me. So, but then now I'm thinking it's like two things. There is that what you want and what the another people want. I would want to that there is not that burden on my children to go to the grave, to take care of the grave and do everything to make it beautiful and spend their time, but rather they can go in their own place where they make that special place for me or for my husband where we are, because as Anne said, the person is not gone in our hearts. They're still there. They know us. So I'm like thinking, do I ask them? Do they want to? Because in 10 years, they can, my children are still young, but when I'm older, I could ask, do you want me to go in a coffin or would you like me to be cremated? But then you're thinking, in 20 years time afterwards, when they have their own children and there's family and they're older, will they want that then? So is it my choice or is it their choice in the end? That is my thinking now.
Thank you. Thank you. And I believe that that's why that conversation needs to take place, so that there's a balance between what we want as the person who's going to die and what is going to be helpful and what's going to work for our family. And I think my closing message, and I do want us to pause for a moment because it is World AIDS Day, and I said on my LinkedIn post today that we would honor and respect it. It's Grief Awareness Week starting from tomorrow, 2nd of December through to the 8th of December. And incidentally, any donations to the Daniel Spargo-Mabbs Foundation is being what's it called? It's been matched.
Yes, we've got, it's Big Give Week from the 2nd to the 9th of December. So we've got match funding. So everything that's given over then up to 12,500 will be match funded. So if anyone sees this over the next 7 days, we'll put it to very good use.
Please, I think that's worth remembering. I'm just remembering something. I think one of the things I wanted to land on as we close, and we will have a closing round, is that even if we do get it wrong, even if other people do get it wrong, even if we haven't had those conversations in the past, it's not too late to start. And we can still redeem situations. So my mom passed away a few years ago, and I'm not one to visit graves. As you heard at my opening talk, my dad died many years ago, and I'm not one to visit graves. But my mom loved gardening. She loved nature, and she loved animals. And it so happened coincidentally that in Harwell, where I lived, the same month that she died, I got this message from the gardening club saying, do you still want that tree planted that we mentioned a couple of years ago or whatever? So lo and behold, there is a Nottingham medlar planted in Harwell Village recreation grounds with a little plaque that says, to mom. And I love visiting that tree. And I know mom loved nature, and I would have been walking the dogs for the most part, visiting that tree. So there is a way to be creative, and actually it can be a fun conversation. Not that I ever had that conversation with my mom, but I'm sure she would be laughing. Can I suggest, because it's 3 minutes past 5, and I was thinking of doing this at 5, that we just pause for a moment and remember that even in 2024, according to the statistics, there are thousands of people still dying from AIDS. There are thousands of people still contracting AIDS, and it is still a huge crisis. And there is actually a link with the young woman who died in November. Her mom had AIDS and gave her up for adoption. And so I'm sure it's very much on the hearts of my friends as they are still dealing with that large bank account of grief. So let's just pause for a moment. Thank you. I think if I were to have one word to sum up today, it would be around the word tears and their value. And I guess in the closing round, that's where I want to end. Permission for tears, permission to grieve. And whoever feels they want to go next, please go ahead until everyone has spoken.
I would like to say the closure. As Anne said differently, the closure, I too agree with Ceri. The closure was for me, that the person physically is not here. So the closure is for me.
I just say, I'm saying this to myself, but I picked it from something that Anne said, but there isn't a timetable. there's not a you should be doing better than you are because you're doing how you are. I'm saying that to you, Fiona, me, because it's very easy to think, goodness me, it's ridiculous. It'll be 12 years in January since Dan died. Why am I not doing better than I'm not. The truth is, I'm not. If I should be, then and I don't think anyone else is saying that to me. And if they are, then they are. But I think if you're experiencing bereavement, then you just need to be very, very kind to yourself and just be as it needs to be. And for the people around you that might be experiencing grief, just be very gentle and patient and let them be how they need to be.
I think I would just want to salute Fiona's wisdom in what she's just said. And I don't know, but I can imagine some of how hard that journey has been to get to this point. And that it will be a journey that she's always on, as are we all. And we can learn from each other and we can apply things to each other. But at the end of the day, we need to, take care of ourselves and respect our own needs. And I think that's very important. While at the same time, as Ceri said, being prepared to listen to those who know us well when they say, maybe you just need a little bit of input to get through this bit because you're obviously kind of struggling a bit. And that's can be quite hard to find the right people at the right time. But just hang on in there and keep going, and there will be help.
Yes, from my point of view, moving on to what Sanita said earlier, I suppose it's time to start telling the children that however they deem fit and appropriate is however they can deal with my death. As long as I have one piece of music that I've already chosen played, then the rest is up to them, because they're the ones that come after. They're the ones that need to grieve in their own ways. And as long as we can have a bit of humour around that conversation, I guess, then I'm probably being me as well. And that might be a good way to start things off. Yeah, an uncomfortable dad conversation. They're all old now, so it should be easier, and it should be something we should do. And if I'm preaching that to other people, then well, of course I should be doing it myself.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm conscious that it's 5:10 as we do this recording, and based on the timetable, we have 5 minutes. I do have one question. I don't know if anyone else does, but I also want to respect that if people need to leave at 5:15, that we respect that. Fiona, you said that it came a time, you were very appreciative when people were around and that you weren't alone, but it came a time where you really needed to be alone. How did you let people know? And have you thought of ideas since then where you can, I don't know, put something on the front door that says, do not disturb? That's obviously not like a hotel sign.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think it was so chaotic for us to start off with, because it was just such a shock. It wasn't in the normal run of things at all, and so the chaos of people just turning up completely randomly was just fitting, and it helped. Just having being surrounded by people that cared about us and cared that Dad died. But then actually I would say probably most of the time, unless someone's in that chaos, it's really good to know that someone's going to knock on the door and not just turn up. Actually, probably most of the time. Sometimes it is just the right moment. Someone comes with a, especially if they come with a cake, but you know, or flowers. But more often it's good to know. And at that point, in fact, this was my lovely Anne-Marie at King's, my bereavement nurse, who just said, I was talking to her. She was really good at checking in very frequently and regularly, especially to start off with. And I said, I'm just fine. People were being so kind. I think they were so mindful that Tim was back at work. I was hopeless. To me, ages to get back to work. My parents had gone and I was all on my own at home, and I must need company, which was so kind of them. But she said, look, why don't you say, I can have receive, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I can receive visitors in the afternoon. And I put that out through our church network. We've got such a lovely caring church network, and I just let a couple of friends that know, who got no other friends, and just said, look, I'm a bit rubbish in the mornings. I'd love to see people, but maybe after 2. And so that's what people, I didn't realize how many of my friends work part-time until I was no longer working. And as I say, it was just so kind of people. And I was so appreciative that people were so generous with their time and with their hearts. And it is so brave to face a bereaved parent. But it, for me, it got to a point where it did need a bit of management.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful to think about that too. Absolutely. We have time for one more question, if there is one.
Not really a question, but I would like to say to Fiona, to other Fiona, I'm so sorry that what happened to you, but also that the thing that you do is very brave and very good work that you do. So I do really appreciate that you're trying to help other children and families to go through this. You're doing amazing in my eyes.
Thank you so much, Sunita. That's really kind. Thank you.
And I have marked the bell on Fiona's LinkedIn to receive notification of all her posts, and I'm amazed at what I've learned. There is so much to learn, and this drug education charity is doing amazing work. So as the clock ticks and we have 1 minute left, I'm going to honor all our time and ask you in closing, succinctly, sincerely, specifically, what have you appreciated about the time we've had together? Anyone can start, and I will close.
People's honesty. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anne.
I was going to say honesty as well, and you got there first, but it's so refreshing to be able to have an honest conversation in this space.
I'd like to appreciate the bravery of you speaking about all the hard things that happen around us.
Yeah, for me as well. Bravery and honesty. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share that.
Thank you all. I appreciate each and every one of you for giving up your time, not just in this hour and 15 minutes and the prep time we had beforehand, but in the time as we drew close to this over the couple of weeks since I thought of this idea, where you agreed to be here. I so honor you and appreciate you for that. Thank you. I'm going to switch off the recording now. Goodbye to anyone who's listening. And remember the 2 charities we're supporting. The links will be available. It's Lupus UK and DSM Foundation.